everyone can hear me. My name is Neil. I'm from FinTech Cadence, and I have the team with me online for our first ever university series done virtually. So thank you for joining us. Just to get a little bit of an interaction here, I would like to see if you can hear me. You'll notice you can click on participants and raise a hand and show me that you're there, or message in the chat. Just want to see that everyone is there and tuning in. We're going to give it a few seconds just so we can make sure that everyone is here in the live webinar. Great. Excellent. Thank you. Cool. So we're going to get started in about 30 seconds. All right, so I'm going to jump right in now. So again, thank you everyone for joining us. It's our first live webinar done on Facebook Live and being recorded, and our first university series launched today on Thursday. So thank you for joining us. Just to let you know that this is being streamed and it will be recorded. So if you have any trouble with that, you can keep your cameras off, or you can make sure that you just hide your comments, okay? So moving right along, we're very happy to announce that we're collaborating with Concordia Blockchain Club. And I have, excuse me, one moment. And I have everyone on the line with me. So today's speakers are Kate Stapleton from Concordia Blockchain Club. She is the founder of the club and a security consultant and Ethereum developer. She's the head of the Blockchain Education Network, as well as an Ethereum teaching assistant. And she currently runs her own startup allowing cryptocurrency offline. And we have Maciek Sepnik. He is Director of Sales and Marketing at Verify, the core organizer of the Bitcoin Montreal meetup. He also, with Verify, they are the Montreal-based company offering simplified Bitcoin ownership, as well as advanced Bitcoin security devices for private investors and companies. Perfect. Our agenda for the night is an introduction from us, FinTech Cadence, an overview of blockchain by Concordia Blockchain Club, and the future of crypto with Maciek, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end. So, I work with FinTech Cadence. It's a little bit slow, sorry for that. And we are a nonprofit community and ecosystem builder within Montreal. And we focus really on three pillars. That is helping to educate FinTech talent through our ecosystem. We have several outreach events such as this. We support and create early stage startups, and I'll go into a few of our programs relating to that. And we also collaborate with financial institutions and partners to help solve real FinTech challenges. So some of the programs we have specifically for students are a certificate program. So that is a session which is actually currently wrapping up, where you can join in to learn about FinTech and how the ecosystem works within Montreal. What are the verticals? What are the types of technologies? We also have a program called Formathon, which I'll get into, which is happening May 28th this summer. And we have the University Series, which is currently going on and is being launched tonight. So one thing that I would really like to get across here is Formathon is meant for students and young professionals who are looking to get into FinTech. And they can do so by either creating a startup to address the industry challenge, or doing research based on an industry challenge. So these are existing challenges within the FinTech ecosystem that are presented for teams to help solve. And you can do that over the course of 3 weeks. Basically, what you do is you create a team and try and adjust this challenge to an open innovation concept. So you go through design thinking, you will be working with mentors and experts to help understand the issues, and then you all come together on a pitch day and a demo day where you will be presenting your solution to the mandators throughout the industry. So that's something that's coming up on May 28th. We can give you more information later on. And we are currently launching our university series. This is the first, The Future of Crypto. But as you can see, we go all the way up until May 21st with topics in working in fintech, discovering the tech in fintech, cashless payments, managing risk, invest or save. So this is financial freedom with fintech, data ownership and future trends, as well as accelerate innovation, which is how to be an entrepreneur. So these are very exciting, and it's going to be going on every Thursday at 4 p.m. starting tonight. And that is us from FinTech Cadence. So now I'd like to introduce Kate from Concordia Blockchain Club.
Hey guys, can everyone hear me? Awesome. So, my name is Kate Stapleton, and I founded, what's going on here? How do I get out of here? There we go. Sorry about that. There we go. So I founded the blockchain club at Concordia. And essentially we have two tracks, right? We have an education track, which is where we host meetups and events to introduce students and teach them about blockchain technologies like Bitcoin, Ethereum, all that. And we also have a development track where we host coding meetups and teach people to start developing and deploying things like decentralized applications and smart contracts on the blockchain network. So to start, I'm just going to do a quick intro to what exactly is blockchain technology. I'm going to keep it to like 10-15 minutes. So what is blockchain technology? Well, blockchain is a type of technology and it's not a single application, right? So think the internet versus email, where blockchain is the internet and Bitcoin is email. So cryptocurrencies, they're really just one application that run on blockchain technology. So what does blockchain do? Well, it creates an incorruptible digital ledger of transactions, and I say that in quotations, that can be programmed to record and track not only financial transactions like you have in Bitcoin, but anything of value, including information, files, etc. And for this talk, right, and for the sake of clarity, I'm going to be discussing financial transactions based on the Bitcoin blockchain. So a blockchain, it uses a distributed database to source the information for this distributed ledger, meaning that all the information on the blockchain is part of a shared and constantly audited community database that's not stored on one single location or by one central authority, which makes it completely decentralized. And this means that there are public and verifiable records for every single transaction, right? So this means that there's no central point of failure for anyone to attack or alter. Like
Kate, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah?
I can't see your screen. We can't see your screen if you are sharing something.
Oh. Okay, sorry, this is my first time.
No problem.
Here we go.
Perfect.
Okay,
thank you
awesome.
very much.
So, sorry. All right, is that better?
Yes, it's perfect. Thank you very much, Kate.
So, okay, sorry about that. So this is the first slide that I showed. This is basically like a very kind of simplified version of how blockchain works, right? So I'm going to explain all these steps and kind of get into it. So as you can see here, right, you've got a centralized database and you've got a distributed database. In a blockchain, it's the distributed database model. So it's a collection of records that a crowd oversees and maintains rather than relying on a single entity, right, like the bank, to host all the data on a single or proprietary server. So whereas a bank, right, in the centralized version, holds all the information, now in the distributed version that blockchain uses, everyone holds a copy of all the ledgers on the blockchain. So blockchain is hosted by millions of computers, which are called nodes, and they're hosted simultaneously, meaning that all information is shared across the public blockchain and is accessible to anyone at any time. And every node or computer, they act as an administrator for their particular blockchain, since there's a bunch of different blockchains, and they're all part of the network voluntarily. So the blockchain network, it exists in a constant state of consensus between all of these computers. And this means that the network automatically checks in with itself during a set amount of time to check and recheck all the transactions, making it a self-auditing ecosystem of connected nodes or computers, like you can see in this model here, the distributed database model. So every transaction that occurs within a set amount of time, it's lumped together, right? So in Bitcoin, this is approximately 10 minutes. It's then reconciled, right? So these transactions, the block is then reconciled. So it's either accepted as legitimate or it's rejected as fraudulent by the network. And then these groups of approved transactions are called blocks. So what does a block contain exactly? Well, each block contains its unique data, its unique hash, which I'm going to get into, and the previous block's hash. And the data stored inside the block, it depends on the type of blockchain. But again, for this example, we're looking at Bitcoin. So let's actually look at an example of a block. So here, blockchain.com, this is a block explorer, right? So we have a block. So here's the hash. Here's a number of confirmations. Here's the timestamp. Here's the miner who mined it, so ant pool mining. And then you can kind of get into some more information. And then here's the actual transactions in the block and in all the previous blocks. So as you can see, right, like I just showed, the blocks contain the information of more than just one transaction. So it's not one transaction per block, it's all the transactions broadcast in that amount of time. And also, this is what I mean when I say that a blockchain represents a public ledger, right? Anyone can access and view every transaction on the blockchain network at any time. So each block represents a transactional record, but it's the chain component that links them together and makes it a blockchain. So blocks are created by first being confirmed by the distributed network of computers, right, of nodes, and then they're permanently linked together with the previous entry in the chain. Sorry, they're linked together to the previous entry in the chain with a hash function. So I've mentioned this before. So what is a hash, right? Basically, it's a mathematical function that converts an input of letters and numbers into an encrypted, right, which is something that's very secure and hard to crack, output. So before, right, the plain text would be legible to UNI, but after the hash function, the hash text would be completely illegible. And a hash is created using an algorithm, right? So it's thus the algorithm that's used is a hashing algorithm. And you can think of a hash like a fingerprint, right? It identifies the block and all of its contents, and it's always unique. So once a block is created, its hash is constantly being verified, like I said before, since the blockchain network exists in this constant state of consensus. So if you change anything inside the block, right? Like if you're trying to tamper with already approved transaction information, right? Like how much Bitcoin someone sent you, it'll cause the hash to change. And the first block in any blockchain is special as it can't point to any previous blocks, right? Since it's the first one. And we call this the genesis block. So here you have a very simplified version of what a blockchain looks like. Obviously there's not individual names of who's sending and receiving Bitcoin, but you have all the transactions, right? You have the correct signatures, which is the hash. Here you have the genesis block, block 1, and then block 2 contains its hash, and then block 3 contains the hash of block 2, and so on and so forth. So if the fingerprint of the block, right, the hash, should change, it is no longer the same block. And since each one of these blocks contains the hash of the previous one, like I've said, part of what makes blockchain so secure is that by changing the hash of one, it affects all the remaining blocks in the chain and they all become corrupt. So if an attacker were to try and tamper with the second block on the chain, for example, it would cause that hash to change, obviously, making the third and all following blocks invalid. Like I've said, since they no longer store the correct hash of that block, right? So here, the correct hash is PP4, but someone's tampered with it and now it stores the hash of 9BZ. So it's corrupt and it corrupts the whole rest of the chain. So hashes alone, they're not enough to prevent tampering. So to protect the blockchain even further, since it's completely decentralized and we don't have any sort of issuing body protecting it, it uses something called proof of work. So quickly, what is proof of work? Well, like I've said, for a block to be successfully added to the chain, they have to be linked to each other. And for this to happen, a very complex puzzle has to be solved. And we call this a cryptographic puzzle. And the computer that solves the puzzle first shares that solution to all the other computers on the network. And this is called the proof of work. And mining is what creates the incentive to submit these valid blocks, right? To share this proof, to calculate and share this proof of work, since it takes a huge amount of computing power. And miners are just machines that are created with the sole purpose of solving these puzzles, right? So this is a Bitcoin miner, this is an Antminer, pretty standard one. So they verify and approve transactions, and they're awarded Bitcoin or whichever cryptocurrency they're mining for lending their computing power to the network and successfully adding a block. So every 10 minutes or so, all the valid transactions that have been broadcast to the network are added into a block. They're hashed, right? So all their information is compressed into a string of numbers and letters. Then the miners on the network compete to solve this hash, which is, again, a difficult mathematical problem based on the cryptographic hash algorithm that I discussed before. So again, the solution, this is what we call the proof of work. And the solution proves that the miners spent the time and resources necessary, so the computing power and the energy, to solve the equation. And like I said, the first miner that solves this, they broadcast the results to the rest of the network. The rest of the network confirms that the solution is valid. And when a block is solved, the transactions contained are considered confirmed, and the block is added to the chain. So it's the combination of these really complex mathematical equations, as well as the distributed verification by all the nodes on the network, that really creates trust in every single block on the chain without needing a third party. So this means, right, that trust can be decentralized. So you don't need to rely on something like a bank. Instead, you can rely on the distributed nodes on the blockchain network. In proof of work, it slows down the creation of new blocks. In Bitcoin's case, it currently takes about 8 minutes to calculate the proof of work and add a new block to the chain. So quickly, let's look at another block explorer. So here, there's a bunch of blocks. So you can look at Bitcoin, Ethereum, whatever you want. So here we see that the average block time is about 9 minutes. Blocks in the last 24 hours, 157, that averages 7 blocks an hour. And you can go down and look at everything from the difficulty, the hash rate, the profitability of mining, kind of everything that you'd want to see for this. So this is another block explorer. So basically, all this to say that tampering with the blocks, the blockchain network ensures that it's very difficult, since if you mess with one block, it means you force the recalculation of these proof of work statements for all the following blocks on the chain. So basically, security on the blockchain, it really comes from the combination of hashing and the proof of work mechanism. Another layer of security, right, which is what we talked about before, it comes from using a peer-to-peer open network where anyone is allowed to join. So when someone joins a network, their node or their computer gets a full copy of all the transactions on that particular blockchain and stores it. And their node uses this information to verify that everything is still in order and that transactions are all still correct, so nothing's been tampered with. So as I've said a bunch of times, blockchain exists in a constant state of consensus, since it's constantly verifying these hashes and these proof of work statements. So basically, so far, to sum up, here's how traditional centralized ledgers work, right? So if Bill wants to send money to Justin, he's got to go through something like a bank, a centralized ledger, which holds a copy of all the transactions. Whereas the blockchain's peer-to-peer network ledger works by letting Bill transact directly with Jenny, and then they both now hold an entire copy of the ledger. So the last piece of the security puzzle that keeps the blockchain secure, it's really strong encryption. And this is in the form of public-private key encryption. And this ensures that users on the network can trust each other, and it's what allows users to transact directly with each other without the need for a trusted intermediary like a bank. So it's what allows for this model rather than this model. So encryption, very simply, it's a process of taking information and scrambling it so that only certain people with permission can view it. And there's 2 kinds of encryption, symmetric and asymmetric, but we're going to stick with asymmetric since that's what blockchain uses. So this is going to sound very complicated, but it's not. Blockchain uses asymmetric public-private key encryption. And the way to think about this is that it's similar to a mailbox, right? The public address is like your PO box address. Anyone can see it, they can send mail there, but only your key opens the mailbox, so only you can read the letters. So obviously I'm quite an artist, but so to break it down, to transact with each other, right? You've got Bob and Alice, and they both have to generate a key pair on their computers, right? Which creates their public and their private key. And one of the most popular and secure ways to do this is using the RSA algorithm. And this creates keys that are mathematically linked to each other. So the public key that encrypts your data and the associated private key is the only key that can then decrypt that data. And it's important to note here that even though these two keys are linked, one can't be derived from the other, which is what some people have questions about. So that means if you know someone's public key, you can't figure out their private key from it. So going back to the mailbox analogy here, the owner of the PO box is the only one with the private key. So Bob and Alice, right, they exchange addresses or public keys. And then Alice encrypts her message with Bob's public key and then sends it back to Bob, who uses his private key to unlock the document and view it. And this is where the asymmetric encryption comes in. It ensures that only Bob can decrypt the message and read it, right? So here you've got Eve snooping, but she's not able to see any of the text and she doesn't have any of the keys. So there's no way for her to intercept and decrypt the messages. So in Bitcoin, asymmetric encryption, that ensures that only the owner of a Bitcoin or cryptocurrency wallet can withdraw and transfer funds to and from it. So these messages that I've just talked about, in this case, are actually transactions. So cryptocurrency wallets, they're what generate your public and your private key, and they provide the address to send and receive cryptocurrency. And your public key is where people can send coins to, and your private key is what decrypts the funds and allows you to access them. So public-private key encryption used in digital wallets works like this. We're going to use Bob and Alice again. So Bob and Alice, they want to complete a Bitcoin transaction. Each of them holds a private and a public key, which creates a secure digital identity, because your public key and your private key, together they equal a digital signature, which mathematically verifies that it's in fact you. So the process begins with Alice taking her private key, making an announcement to the Bitcoin software that she's sending a specific amount and attaching it to Bob's public key, resulting in a transaction record. This record is then added to the block, right, that contains the transaction's digital signature, the timestamp, and the other information that I've shown you. And then this is broadcast to all the nodes in the network, and it's mined. So once confirmed, right, once mined and approved, Bob then uses his private key to unlock the transaction and receive the funds. So to end here, I know that was a lot of information. Basically, blockchain is a combination of these three key technologies, right? A peer-to-peer, open and decentralized network, unique protocols like Bitcoin's proof of work and mining, and public-private key cryptography that allows people to transact directly with each other by cutting out the middleman and mathematically ensures it's them while keeping their transactions secure and encrypted. So yeah, basically combined, these allow blockchain to be completely decentralized and secure. That's the end of my presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. There we go.
Hi, Neil. Sorry, I think we're having a bit of trouble hearing what you're saying.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now it's much better. Thank you.
Oh, my apologies. So there's still some technical issues, as you can see, from being our first university series webinar. But apologies for that. Just saying thank you so much, Kate, for presenting that. I think it's a really good introduction to what we'll be doing. especially in these times when we have a lot of quantitative easing policies taking place within our government, and there's uncertainty in the markets and quite a bit of volatility. The topic is more relevant than ever about cryptocurrencies and what it means for you, whether you should be interested in it or involved in it, and then what does the future really bring for with his presentation.
Hello, I'm guessing that you finish on a note when you introduce my presentation. Thank you, Neil, and for Kate for inviting me to this virtual meetup. And I'll be happy to present more in detail what I think about all of this and why people should think about Bitcoin and crypto more than ever. So let me just jump on that presentation real quick. Is everybody good hearing me? Yeah?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, perfect. So thank you again. So my name is Maciej Cepnik. I'm from Verify, which is a consultancy group in Bitcoin. We do Bitcoin OTC services, security service, and all of that, and also organize the Bitcoin Montreal meetup group. And we do a lot of talks in regards of Bitcoin, its technology, and monetary implications. So since today's topic is about uncertain times, I wanted to do a quick overview of what is happening exactly in the financial market, and then also through the monetary policies different governments are deciding to take and different solutions they propose for the crisis. So let me just go over quickly all these different measures and what are their impacts. So I just want to tell you in advance, it doesn't look good in my opinion, and it won't be a happy presentation. So be prepared for harsh information, I would say. So how bad and uncertain is it exactly? So if we go, for example, the first indicator of financial market will be all the different indexes that represents different market shares of different companies, either in the US, in the European Union, in Canada. So you have these different indexes representing the availability and the prices of all these companies combined. And during all the crashes, when people are in need of higher liquidity, one of the first things they're going to sell will be actions from different companies because they need cash. So, for example, one of the biggest index, which is the S&P 500, which is like an index to represent the availability of the 500 biggest company in the US, can show us how big the crash is happening right now. So here you have a graph showing basically all the famous different crises that happened during the 100 last years. So you have the, for example, the 1929 crash. You have the tech bubble crash, different types of crashes. So this graph represents in how much sessions it took in order to take a minus 20% dive in the index, in the price. And so far, the COVID-19 pandemic crash caused the most rapid crash in all history of all the different crashes that happened during the last 100 years. So here, for example, if you look at the blue line, the famous crash of 1929 that led America and the whole world into the Big Depression took more or less 30 days in order to drop more than 20%. But the recent crisis, the crash that happened in the financial markets, it took less than 20 days. And so far, the crash is from the highest point of the index, it's minus 26%. So you must think that this represents also the livelihood and the different assets that people were holding for their when they retire, and basically you have all this value that disappeared and from the markets and from the hands of the people. So this is really an important crash, and there's no signs that it's really gonna stop at this point. So it's really a question of how far it's gonna go. And for example, the 1929 crash, the whole market crashed more than 50%. So there's still room in order to this market to be crashed even more. So why do exactly people sell their stocks if they believe at the first place that these were good investments? Well, people sell those stocks because they need cash. So there's a saying in the financial market that cash is king because it's the most liquid asset and it's the most accepted for any debt repayment. So the problem right now in our economy is that basically all the small businesses don't have a big range of flexibility in terms of the debts they have to pay. So for example, in a recent studies by the Chase Bank, one of the biggest bank in the United States, they realized that basically the median of the cash reserves that different businesses have in order to pay the debts are 27 days. So after 27 days, half of the businesses have to sell whatever assets they have in order to pay their debts. So if you take into consideration that some governments have applied quarantine and like stop of all economic activities for more than a few weeks, while most of the companies and different businesses that are operating on that thin margin of flexibility of having cash reserve will basically have to sell all their stuff. And this also applies for individuals that have to pay their mortgages or have to pay their leases on their car. Everybody has to sell whatever asset they have in order to pay these debts. So that's one reason why the market is crashing like that. So this is like the first thing we're gonna see in a crash, but different governments are gonna try to slow down or try to act upon this crisis in order to stimulate spending and not so people the whole machine of the economy continues to work. So it's really hard to present the subject like in a quick and effective manner because the financial system we have is pretty complex and there's a lot of intricacies that goes into place. But what you must know is that every country right now on Earth works on a fiat system, which means that all the money we use, for example, Canadian dollars, the US dollar, euros, yens, are controlled by a single entity, which are central banks, and they are independent. They're an independent institution from the national governments. So they are in charge of trying to regulate the economy and keep the flow of goods and money going. And one of the tools they have in order to do so is basically the interest rate they apply for commercial banks. So how the new money is created and distributed through the economy. First of all, the Federal Reserve, for example, which is the national bank of the United States, will create money and then lend that money to commercial banks in order so the commercial banks can redistribute them back to the people, to businesses, and the money is being distributed that way. So this process is called quantitative easing. And one way in which you can stimulate spending and more lending is by reducing the interest rate that the bank, the Fed applies to commercial bank. The problem is that right now, one of the reactionary responses in the crashes of 2008, if you see just like a little bit on the left of 2010, they reduced the interest rate to 0. So that started, as you may know, like the biggest bull run of all time of the last 10 years. But there's no margin left to play with to stimulate the economy more, because basically the interest rate is already at 0% and people are still not taking loans and people are still scared to take any kind of debt, more debt than they have already. So we're a pretty special place right now, since like the Federal Reserve and basically all different governments over the world are already at the 0% rate, so they don't have leverage no more in order to stimulate the economy like this. So what can they do? What can they do next instead of quantitative easing? What they can do is basically print money and give it directly to people and businesses, and not pass through these commercial banks, as you will do with quantitative easing. So for those who listen to the news related to all the different fiscal stimuluses that happened over the last 2 weeks because of the coronavirus, it's pretty ridiculous how much they want to print money and inject into the economy. So this is like an unproved theory, since it didn't happen really since the Second World War II. And even at that time, in a place where all the countries in the world were basically fighting each other, the stimulus was only 6% of the GDP. But now the US is debating if a 2 trillion stimulus, which is almost 10% of the GDP of the United States, will be enough in order to restart the machine of the economy. So it's pretty not looking good in that sense, because we don't know really the effect of what it's going to take. And in the last weeks, you have this meme over there, which is the sound of the printing machine, like a brrr, and people kind of make fun of this, that the United States are thinking that they just can restart the economy by creating more papers on which there's dollar signs on them. So it's really hard to say if this is gonna have a certain effect. And I also wanted to share a quick video of one of the most important guy in the Fed saying basically they have infinite money in which they could pump in the economy. So let me just play that quickly.
There's no sound.
No sound? Okay, just sorry. Okay, so I'm just gonna recap what he's saying, because I don't know how to use the sound of the video directly into the video. So basically, the guy is saying that the Fed has infinite. Hello? So basically, the guy is saying that they have infinite cash in which they could pump the economy in, and people shouldn't be scared about also the money they have at the bank. So another scary thing that is happening right now, people are trying to retrieve their money from the bank, and you have a kind of a bank run happening, and different banks are limiting the amount of cash you can withdraw from the bank. And at the same time, the US just withdraw a rule that was applied to all commercial banks to have reserve up to 10% of the total deposits of the clients. And this rule was ruled out this week. So basically, people in these times, they're gonna have a really hard time to trust the banks that they actually have the money, the liquidity to guarantee the balances they have into their bank accounts. So what might happen, and already happened in the history of different societies, is bank runs. So people go to the bank and rush and withdraw every cash they have in order to have this cash in hand and not rely on commercial bank to keep the reserve. So you have all these different measures that the governments are taking in order to try to stimulate the economy. And this is really debatable and a hard subject, but the question is that bad effect of printing money is going to be worse than the potential effect of the coronavirus? And that's a pretty hard subject. I don't want to jump on this, but the danger is real. So what exactly is the danger here is that once the governments starts to print money all he wants, you have this phenomenon of inflation, which means your money your money loses the power of purchase, and basically the same amount of dollar will buy you less goods and less services than it will before inflation. So right now we're not really worried about inflation because in the last 30 years or so, it was really stable and around 2%, which is like the preferred target that the Fed is trying to achieve all time. And with a 2% inflation rate, you don't really see that effect in everyday life. So it's not that bad. But in hyperinflation cases, you could see the inflation rising crazy percents every day, basically. So even before you can rush to the store, the dollars you receive from the government as payment and retribution for the loss of economic activities, well, it doesn't. Before you reach the store, it already loses value, and that happened all the time during the history. It happened in Venezuela in recent years. Basically, all cash reserves the cash doesn't represent saving anymore, and people don't keep it, and it becomes trash. It becomes just paper. So that can be a risk of printing too much money without really thinking what's going to be the real effect on this, and this could lead to a potential catastrophe. And it's not only economic shock, but also a cultural shock, because we're not used to it. It's really hard to say how people are gonna react to it. So it's pretty scary. And you also have all the different countries fighting in order to devaluate as less as possible their currency. But you may know that for now the US dollar is still the strongest. So what are the currencies that are going to be the most affected at the moment are all the other fiat money. So euro, yen, yuans, they're going to have a hard time to compete with the US dollar, and they're going to lose their value first before the US dollar drops as well. So it's just one of the danger of printing too much money. And you also have job losses. So so that shows all weekly demands in terms of the gray areas, all different crises, and you always see spikes during depression times. People apply for unemployment because they just lost their job. And scary enough, during 2009, you see this big spike, and this is in the US, by the way. And you can see over there the big line reaching over 3 million of unemployment claim in the US just in the last 2 weeks. So this is unprecedented, like this is crazy. And it also happened in Canada, so over 1 million people already claim unemployment. So you have this extra pressure to the governments. They have to guarantee like the safety and livelihood of all these people that just lost the job. So that's another pressure that happened. So what about crypto, right? So we came to talk about crypto here. I just want to give an overview of like what is happening in the financial crisis and how governments are trying to react to it. And weirdly enough, over 11 years ago in 2009, we just went out from a crisis, and that's when Bitcoin was born, basically. And what's really interesting is that in the first block, the Genesis block of Bitcoin, as Kate explained, that the first block won't be related to any previous block. Satoshi Nakamoto, which is the main, which is the inventor of Bitcoin, time-stamped the headline of the Times on the 3rd of January 2009, and he wrote into the first block of Bitcoin, Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks. So that was in the middle of the financial crisis. And the whole theory that I'm going to present to you is that basically Bitcoin was meant for that type of crisis. And we're going to explore why. So, you know, just to put a little bit of context for those people that don't know much about Bitcoin and its invention. So basically, it rose from frustration, like the government's bailing out bigger banks because they got bankrupted and they didn't manage their assets well and their debt. But all the different small businesses and startups and etc., they don't have that access to this capital that is going to bail them out. So that's how the insatisfaction comes from. So what will be what are the properties in Bitcoin that will make it attractable and suited for this current situation? And again, this is debatable, but this is my theory and a little bit of the theory of all Bitcoiners. So once you have uncertainty in that kind of market and you don't know how much there's going to be dollars floating around and what are going to be your final portion of all of that and the current and the final inflation rate of all of this, you're looking for certainty. You're looking for assets that can store your value in some ways that is predictable, and Bitcoin can give you that predictability since it's scarce. So in the protocol, it's written that there's only going to be 21 millions, and so if you have a portion of this, the only thing you can know is that you have a certain scarcity that is guaranteed by the protocol. And one of the things that also is important is that it's censorship resistant. So no government can take it from you if you control it well. And why is that? Is because there's a lot of nodes in the Bitcoin protocol that guarantee this immutability and the fact that you can't really steal the Bitcoin from you if you don't have access to the keys. And this relates, for example, to the fact that people wanting to retrieve some cash at the moment from different banks, well, they have some limits and they can withdraw their cash. And it's showing that basically people don't really have a control over the money that they're storing in the bank. And it's also decentralized, so there's no single entity there's going to change the rules or is going to, I don't know, make 42 millions Bitcoin. So there's no ways in which that could happen. So that is really important. And people may be attracted to the fact there's no single entity controlling their money. So naturally, in previous crises, people were going for other type of asset that could guarantee that had these natural properties that guarantee scarcity, for example. So gold was one of them. So in the previous financial crisis in 2008, the price of gold surged in comparison to stock indexes and other type of asset. And this is because people have this belief that gold is valuable and it's really kind of an organic human like intuition to hold gold when it's harder times, just to preserve the value they still can hold on. But the problem right now, and it's kind of funny because we all saw this different videos, people rushing to buy toilet paper, which is kind of ridiculous. But gold bars are also in the short supply for everybody. So I have friends that have tried to buy gold in Montreal, in different places. You could buy gold regularly, normally, but people have bought all the gold already that was easily available. And so people wanting to find that kind of reserve store of value and that could go to gold, well, they just can't find anymore. And so that's also showing a sign there's a panic in the market and people rushing to try to preserve the value. So you know, there was always this reserve currency during the the last millennial, and this has always changed. So we could ask ourselves: is it the end of the dollar, the U.S. dollar being the reserve currency of our world right now, and what's gonna replace that, right? So is it gonna be the Chinese yuan? Is it gonna be something else? Is it gonna be Bitcoin? Is it gonna be gold? We don't know. But as you may see, these periods in which there was a certain currency that was like the stable one and considered as the safest one, they have pretty short periods of time, so more or less 100 years. And the US dollar was this reserve currency. Maybe it's the end of it, maybe, I don't know. So in my opinion, it's really the ultimate test for Bitcoin. And also for those who know how Bitcoin works, you know that in order to achieve the 21 million limit of Bitcoins that are in the market, there's this process of which miners are retributed for their efforts for the proof of work every 10 minutes or a certain amount of Bitcoin. And when Bitcoin started, it was 50 Bitcoin every 10 minutes. And every 4 years, there's this process called the halvening, which reduces the amount of Bitcoin that are being released by the protocol independently into the network. So right now we are the third phase. So basically after the first 4 years, we dropped from 50 Bitcoin to 25 Bitcoins. After 4 years after that, it was 12.5 Bitcoin. So we are at that phase right now. And weirdly enough and strangely enough, it's also all this crisis that is happening right now is it's gonna happen in the middle of the halvening in less than 50 days. So you have a reduction of the amount of Bitcoin that are getting released into the protocol, and at the same time you have this crisis. So maybe just because there was also some spikes of interest in regards of Bitcoin halvenings in the past, but it's happening at the same time right now, and people, all the different services, crypto services and Bitcoin services are seeing huge amount of interest into buying Bitcoin recently in the last 2 weeks. And also you have these Google searches that are related for example, to the fact that Bitcoin may be a safe haven. So you have all these people looking for alternatives really quickly. And so it's pretty interesting to see if that is going to work. Well, if it's going to work and if Bitcoin is going to rise in price and it's going to be that safe haven for people. So what about other cryptocurrencies? So I'm mostly an expert in Bitcoin, so I can't talk much about other cryptos, but from my opinion, how I see them is basically Bitcoin is already risky enough, and all the other cryptos are even more riskier. So at these kind of times, people will not seek necessarily high risk, high return type of asset. They will look for something certain, with clear rules and without much experimentation, because basically all this phenomenon of startups, of incubators and all that stuff, when there's a crisis, people don't invest that much. They want to hoard on their cash. They don't want to take on much even bigger risks. They want to get out of risk as much as possible. So in my opinion, since there's already pretty big dominance of Bitcoin compared to other cryptocurrencies, in my opinion, this dominance will even rise more during the next year or the next 2 years, because people will try to find something more less risky. Because much of the other cryptocurrencies are for now experimental assets, and we don't really know if the respective networks is going to work out in the long term. And it's just normal. People are fleeing all different type of risky assets. So in my opinion, it won't be really good. for other cryptos. And you don't have the same decentralization than in Bitcoin. So for example, Bitcoin has between 50 to 100,000 nodes that supports its blockchain, but other cryptocurrency, it's less than few hundreds, so it's not as decentralized. And because of this, since there's less computers running the network, basically, the monetary policy can be changed much easier. And that is really something not desirable when somebody wants to invest in a safe haven asset. So why Bitcoin will go to Bitcoin is because they know it's going to be scarce. And if you invest into cryptocurrencies and you know that their developers have the right and the capability of making 2 times the number of crypto, whatever, it won't be that attractive in terms of investment. So for me, I don't want to really give an opinion about other cryptocurrencies, but in my opinion, it won't necessarily look good because of this global financial crisis. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I think I said like pretty controversial stuff, and I understand some of you may not agree. So I'm ready, to take some questions and opinions and hear what's your opinion about all that. Thank you for letting me speaking again.
Thank you so much, Maciej. Can everyone hear me all right now? So
Yeah.
my apologies. My microphone was off before. So just want to say thank you so much. That was, I was completely absorbed by it, and I'm sure our audience here has some questions for you as well. If not, I have a bunch. So I'll let them either you can write in the chat if you do not want to speak, or you can unmute yourself and ask the questions directly. So open the floor now.
Sorry, if we want to ask questions, we have to raise our hand, or it's first come, first serve. How does it work exactly?
Yeah, absolutely. You can go ahead. William, with your question.
Okay, all right, I'll ask it. So that was really interesting. Thank you. And I was just wondering, so you've explained how since it's decentralized, the government can't affect it. It's a distributed network. But then I was just wondering, maybe I misunderstood something. But how does that guarantee that the currency as a whole is more stable than other ones? So in a time of crisis like that, how do you restart the economy in some sense?
So it's hard for me to say how to restart the economy because it's a pretty complicated subject. So from what I presented, I mostly said what are going to be the options, few options for people to retrieve the few kind of value they can hold on during this time. So I'm not saying maybe that we will run into a world where everybody is using Bitcoin, but it might be like this life-saving boat when everything is crashing. So it's maybe the US dollar is gonna be strong enough to pass through it, and people are gonna be using Bitcoin and gold as this reserve asset in the meantime before they invest back into other stocks or whatever. But at the same time, for example, right now we're all using Zoom, and Zoom is pumping like crazy in the stock market right now. So in these different times, you also have different companies that are innovating and creating, adapting to the situation. So there's definitely gonna be, it's not as if everything is gonna crash, right? So Bitcoin is gonna be that more clear option because it's really easy to understand at some point because you have these 21 million coins that are going to be produced. And your question was how Why? Because is it decentralized? Does it guarantee the scarcity? If I understood well, right? Or
yeah, so that like the government can't interfere directly, but then I was just wondering, then how can you try to facilitate the money flow in the system? How can you incentivize people to spend or invest or borrow?
So that's a really great question. So basically, the system we're running on right now, and basically everybody assumes the monopoly of the government printing the money and controlling the inflation and everything. So all that set of economy is following the Keynesian model, which is a model which spending is incentivized, right? But Bitcoin and gold, they have a different kind of economic model, which is the monetarist model, or also Austrian economic model. And this model relies more on people saving their money for a longer term and thinking twice before doing any kind of spending, because if they have a hard asset or a money that holds value on a longer time and appreciate in value in time, they may hold on their money before spending it. So this is a really a big clash between two types of different economies, and the system we're running on right now, the fiat, only exists since the 1971, when the U.S. governments took out the dollar out of the pegging of gold. So before, when you had some US dollars, you could go to the bank and redeem its equivalent in gold, but that rule stopped in 71. And basically, since that time, people assume that the way we have this money, we use money, and what is money should be controlled by central banks, but maybe there's an alternative, and Bitcoin kind of offers that alternative. And we're at that point of time where the crash is pretty much impossible to stop, because once you stop the economy to a certain point, people cannot pay their debts back, so people starts to default on the debts, and it's really a vicious cycle, and it plunges all the economy. And it's because all that leverage on top, it's really hard to explain like really fastly, but it's two sets of economies, so it's a really good question.
Great. We have another question as well, Maciek.
Yeah.
You talked about this unprecedented quantitative easing round is going to affect inflation, but if there's not much economic activity going on, do you think there'll still be a huge effect on inflation going forward?
Well, the thing is, inflation is kind of needed in an economic system, because you always need new debt to be created in order to pay the ordered debts that have been created in the past. So we may enter in a deflation phase, but this is not something that's desirable by the economy as well. I'm not a economist, I would say. So I still have a problem grasping all the complexity of that financial system we're running on right now. And basically, people in the governments, they're trying to convince us they have this crystal ball, and they can manipulate the economy with interest rate, the inflation, creating more money. But that's the thing, is basically they pretending that they control it, but when a crisis like this happens, anything can happen. So it's really hard to say what really is going to happen. But so that I think that's my I don't really want to be sure of answering to that, because I don't know.
No, fair enough. Thank you very much, Maciek.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions?
Yes, I have a question, please.
Yes, please go ahead. And if you can introduce your name, that would be great as well.
Okay, my name is Valerie, and I'm a student in Alberta. And I have a question. Thank you for the presentation. It was really interesting.
Thank you.
I was interested in cryptocurrency last year, and I tried to buy some, and I did some research. And then I end up finding out that my bank doesn't allow me to buy cryptocurrencies. Since you have to use your bank card, and they just block the transaction. So you're not allowed to buy cryptocurrency using that bank. So I was just wondering how you guys going by buying some cryptocurrencies, and what do you think? Because I was thinking if we have the bank and the government have the power to stop a transaction using cryptocurrency, or they can just wake up in the morning and create a law and decide that this currency cannot be used anymore. How do you go by, like, what you're gonna do about it?
Yeah, so this is a really big concern, because we basically didn't have any really difficult time that much during since the World War II. And so what are going to be the measures, and at what point the governments are going to be limiting what we can do with our money? And that is a really big concern. So for example, I really saw that it can be difficult to buy Bitcoin or other crypto because the banks don't like it. And of course they don't like it because they see it as a danger, right? So if, for example, the governments for the reasons of the coronavirus or whatever reasons they're going to pretend, they're going to limit what you can do with your money, this is a real danger. So for example, people have been put in jail and given big sanctions when the pegging to the dollar, when the dollar was unpegged from gold, and basically keeping gold was illegal, and people are giving fines for them, and some people are even going to jail. So is that something that can happen with Bitcoin? Of course it can happen, because the governments have the monopoly also on violence, I would say. So they have an army, they have the police, and if, for example, at some point they see that, okay, well, these Bitcoiners, they're trying to push another narrative of another type of economy, and they don't like our money, they wanted to use their own, well, we're gonna put them in jail. And that's a possibility. I don't want to go and like a whole dystopia over here, but it's really possible. Are people gonna revolt at that point? Maybe. Are people gonna try to hide their Bitcoins from the governments? Maybe. No, but it's really hard subject. But at that moment, I don't think it's gonna happen that fast. So if you have the possibility of buying Bitcoin, you can still do it, right? So there's different ways in which you can do it. You can use OTC services. For example, if you want to buy Bitcoin from my company, Verify, there's no problem of sending a transfer to us, right? And because we have agreements with the bank in order to do so. You have a ATMs machine, you have different ways in which you can buy Bitcoin still, but is the holding of Bitcoin gonna be permitted once it takes a more important place in the financial system? Maybe not, but I don't know. It's a great question though.
Thank you. Sorry, I have something else to add. I was wondering, I don't know if you guys cover this part in the talk. It's about tax.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if the government already have some regulation about how to tax cryptocurrency for there's people who are doing a lot of buying and selling cryptocurrency right now. So for Canada, is there anything that the government say about how you should tax somebody who's buying and selling cryptocurrencies?
Yeah, let me just send you a quick guide we wrote actually about this. And while cryptocurrencies are taxed as anything else in Canada. So you basically should definitely pay taxes on it. I'm gonna send the link for the blog. It can give you like quick answers for people worrying about this. It was written by the lawyer that works in our firm. And yeah, basically it's taxable. I'm not a tax expert, so I can't say exactly what are the rates and everything, but yeah, you should definitely pay your taxes. But you know, why they collect taxes if they can print as many money as they want? I don't understand, you know?
Just to add, so with cryptocurrency, it's taxed like any other investment. So that means that 50% of the gains are taxable and added to your income for that year. So just treat it like any other investment.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you guys very much. Maybe I'll do a quick plug-in here for one of the startups that we've been working with called ZeoHive, and they're also working on ways that accounting firms can do the taxing around Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. So you can also check them out, Valerie, as well as what Maciek mentioned with Verify too. I'm just going to take one last question. If there's anyone that would like to maybe either raise their hand or go on mute, unmute or on the chat. Okay, perfect. So what I would like to do now is thank everybody for coming.
Sorry, I think William raised his hand. He might have another.
Oh, apologies.
Yeah. So if you have some time, it's okay if
no, of course, William.
Okay.
No, go ahead.
Okay,
well, that will be the last question. Yeah.
Okay, I'm not too knowledgeable in economics, so maybe that's a dumb question, but I'll go ahead. Let's say, you know, over the years, you know, there's more people on the planet, people produce stuff, so the total amount of wealth on the earth increases. How can since the amount of Bitcoin is stable, how do you reflect that exactly? Does the value of the Bitcoin, is there like deflation, or how does it work exactly? If it's more like widely adopted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a really good question. And so basically by units of Bitcoin you will hold, you will have more and more purchasing power in every single units of Bitcoins you have. So for example, Bitcoin is divisible up to 8 digits, and the smallest unit of Bitcoin is called the Satoshi. And so for example, you need to pay less and less Satoshis for something in order to pay for anything. And this leads also to another type of economy, since lending wouldn't be that easy. Before people will lend you any money, they will think it twice, because basically your investment that will do in a certain company or anything will need to be faster than the growth of the purchasing power of Bitcoin. So this leads us to a completely another different type of economy. So I don't think that necessarily all the world will run on Bitcoin right away. And maybe that's never gonna happen, and it's okay. Maybe there's gonna be a world where there's both. There's national currencies and there's also Bitcoin or other crypto, I don't know. Both systems can be worked on together. It's just a question of if the governments are gonna let Bitcoin develop to a certain point where it's unstoppable at some point. So it's a really great question as well. But yeah, every single unit of Bitcoin will basically raise in value, purchasing power.
Okay, thank you very much. Because that's why I was wondering, like, where would the banks let people, borrow money if you'd make more money just keeping it for yourself? Okay.
Yeah. So
thank you.
Yeah, it's a whole another set of different way of acting in the economy, since you're just better holding your money and then spend it, right? And right now you're incentivized to spend your cash because next year it'll be valued less because of inflation. So it's completely different.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Maciek, for the answers. And thank you, William, and everybody, Valerie, for engaging with the questions. Very few quick things before we wrap up. Maciek and Kate, thank you very much for your time, for coming out and supporting us, and for the incredible presentations and the insight that you guys have done. Just to let everybody know, the documents and the presentation will be shared, so you'll have access to it. One last thing I would like to end on is Maciek mentioned that throughout all of these challenges, we see a lot of innovations coming out. The example was given of Zoom. One thing to keep in mind is the third wave of fintech really started growing after the financial crisis of 2008 as well. So where we see a lot of these challenges, we see opportunities come in the form of innovation. And that's something we're trying to really keep the focus on for everybody. So if you are interested in coming up with solutions, if you are looking for ways to support through either financial institutions, the financial sector, the economy at large, then I'd really like to recommend that you guys engage in the Formathon. As Neil mentioned earlier, the Formathon is a 3-week open innovation competition. It's all going to be done remotely, so no matter where you are, Valerie in Alberta or anyone across Canada can participate and work on building solutions. So that's just something to keep in mind. We have the rest of the university series coming up. They'll be taking place. You'll be seeing that in our social media. So if you enjoyed this session, make sure you come and check out the rest of the sessions. And again, thank you everyone for the wonderful session that we